Thank you all for coming out. My name is Aaron Robb. I'm principal at Wahconah Regional High School. On behalf of our Superintendent Lori Kazda and our Assistant Superintendent here, Melissa Palkowski's here, we'd like to welcome you for the second community forum that the School Building Committee has hosted here for Hinsdale and Peru residents. It's not just for Hinsdale and Peru residents, but we're basically holding 4 different meetings around the district for the 7 towns, trying to bring information to you. Really the purpose of this particular meeting is twofold. One, to give you an update on the work that the School Building Committee has done thus far, but more importantly, the second half of this is to get information, input, and feedback from all of you regarding how to move forward based on what you learned tonight. So we have some special guests with us here tonight. First of all, we have representatives from our design team, DRA, who will be speaking tonight, and Carl will be taking over in just a moment. And we also have our owner's project manager from Skanska, John Benzinger over here, who can also answer questions. So between John, Vlad, Carl, and John, we have a lot of experts in the room in terms of architecture, design, and building projects in general. They are also in the process of trying to button up a brand new Taconic, so they're working not that far from us. We also have members of the School Building Committee. If you could just raise your hand real quick, just to kind of give an idea of who you are. So those people that, if you need to reach out to them or give them any sort of feedback or insight, those are good folks to connect with as well. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Carl.
Okay. There's the full list of your building committee there, which is well populated with representatives from all communities. As I said, or as Aaron said, we want to spend about half this evening giving you information about where we're at and sharing you what we've been working on with the building committee, and then basically the other half of the evening getting feedback, because we're at a critical stage in the project of trying to narrow down the options to the one optimal option. The way this is set up, just to put it in context again, there is a great building committee. I don't know if you can see my pointer on the screen, it's a little hard on the monitor, but headed by Sean, who's here, and Tom, who's here. And as Aaron pointed out, Skanska is your owner's project manager. We're the architecture firm. We have architects, engineers, consultants, all under our supervision. There's also a sort of a hidden partner here too. The MSBA stands for Massachusetts School Building Authority. They're partners here because one, they sort of guide the process. They have pretty good template to follow on the steps of this kind of project, and 2, they contribute a significant amount to the cost of this ultimately, and they're reimbursing the cost of this feasibility study too, to the tune of somewhere around 54%. Comes from state. They're funded by yours and my sales tax money, so that money's coming back to the district in that sense. There are basically 3 parts to this phase of the project. We've completed this first part though, the preliminary design program. That's mainly focused about the educational program, and we submitted that submission of information in May, just last month. It focused on, how does Wahconah teach and learn, how do students learn there right now, and how do they want to in the future, regardless of what building project comes out of this. We also, in that phase, looked at existing conditions, both from a physical point of view, do the windows leak, the roof leak, the plumbing system work, those kind of nuts and bolts, but also educationally, how do the spaces work in meeting standards and so forth. And we developed a host of alternatives in that first phase, and we've narrowed that list of alternatives down somewhat. Excuse me, but the real important part of tonight is getting your input to help us in this next phase of the project, which is called preferred schematic. It really gets to a preferred option, taking that short list of options that we have now and figuring out, developing criteria and evaluating them to decide which is the best option for Central Berkshire School District. And we will update the educational plan as necessary too. It is kind of an evolving document, but it basically has been decided in that first phase. And then once we get to one option at the end of this phase in September, we'll move into the schematic design phase where we will develop in more detail the scope of the project so we can put a good cost estimate to it, as well as knowing the schedule too. And that'll wrap up in February of next year and be turned into the state at that point, looking for their approval in April, and then ultimately the region's approval based on that option and the information that goes with it. So that's where we are. We're right in this second step of the process right now. This was part of the first step of getting to that educational plan, where there were visioning sessions. There were sort of large groups and small groups talking about, not just what is Wahconah doing today, but what does it want to do. And again, trying to do it in a way that was kind of neutral about the current state of the school, and not thinking about it physically, but how does what's the optimal for this region, for this district. We also talked a great deal with teachers, administrators, department heads individually too, to understand what their needs are, what their issues are with the current school and so forth, to get background. And we had a series of these community meetings back then too, to get input from you all and others. A couple of the things that came out of that educational program, this was a good statement that somewhat captures an important aspect of the school, where there is a great range of opportunities at that school, a wide variety of curriculum that is something to hold on to, but still maintain that small school feel. And at 500 or so students, there are a little bit more than that now. Enrollments are headed downward slightly, but it is a fairly small school. And the positive aspect of that is that, Aaron as principal can get to know almost every student there. You probably do know every student there by name almost. And certainly know every teacher. Teachers can get to know students in a smaller environment. There are a lot of positives to that kind of and a few of the other concepts and principles that are part of the education plan. These are some of the key words. A few of them you'll see it repeated on 21st century learning and 21st century skills. What do students, what do graduates need to know now to be successful in later life? What the facility is, what does the building need to do? It needs to be flexible, have some teacher planning centers it doesn't currently have. And what are the learning styles that the project should enhance? And a couple of the concepts there: project-based learning, small group collaboration. It sort of represents the fact that students no longer just sit in lectures and rows and listen to a teacher for 45 or 50 minutes, and then the bell rings and they go off to the next class. It's not like that now currently at Wahconah, and certainly the environment could be enhanced to allow even more of this kind of teaching and learning to go on. One of the other aspects of the Ed Plan had a few diagrams that are kind of guiding us as we move forward. This notion of developing classroom clusters where, unlike the school we just walked down here, where you have a corridor and sort of similar sized classrooms on each side, here the notion is maybe it would be more advantageous to cluster classrooms around some kind of collaborative space that can be shared. This is not scheduled space, this is used by the adjacent classrooms. And also notice that there are large and small classrooms and also science labs mixed in. So it's already implying that the school is not going to be organized the way it is today, where all the science labs are together, all the English rooms are together, all the history rooms are together and so forth. That there's the opportunity for some flexibility here, and that may evolve over time. There's also a teacher planning, broken down into each cluster, so the teachers are in close proximity to the students there, and also it's a place for teachers to collaborate as well as students to collaborate, so they don't just stay in their classrooms in the off period doing their planning and so forth. And if you put these together kind of on the scale of the whole school, it'll take four groupings of those clusters to satisfy the enrollment of 460 or so, and they could be grouped around a learning commons, which is kind of the 21st century evolution of a library media center. Just as in here, this is evolving. There'll be fewer books, more open space, more variety of resources, some enclosed rooms off to the side, some maker spaces and other resources available. So again, it becomes a resource for the students and teachers to do some of that different kind of learning and project-based and collaboration and so forth. And also notice that all the academic portion of the school, you might say, is on one side of the diagram, and kind of the public areas of the school, the larger spaces, the auditorium with music rooms, the gym with locker rooms, the cafeteria are on the other side of the school here. Partly to recognize these are on a different schedule often. They're open after hours and weekends, so we want to be able to close off the other part of the building, and also to be more accessible to the community for their use and access. And even though there might be multiple entrances to the building, it's an important concept to make sure there's a main entrance that all visitors are directed to through a control point adjacent to the administration for school safety and security. And the other inherent notion in this diagram by the label Student Commons, it's no longer just a cafeteria. It doesn't just serve lunch. It's a place where students congregate, hang out before school, after school, during school. They can use it as another project area, but it's a flexible space. It kind of acts as the lobby for these larger spaces too, or a breakout space before and after games or performances there. This is the current school. For those who are familiar with it, the layout, the front door is here, administration, gym and auditorium, A and B corridors, long corridors with a couple cross corridors now, open and enclosed courtyards. We analyzed this building too from a standards point of view, looking at the size of spaces, the sort of quality of the spaces in relation to current standards. And the ranking is sort of by color, where red is less than meeting standards, and green are ones that do meet standards, and the yellow ones are kind of marginal. And you can see there's a fair amount of red and yellow spaces in the school. Particularly the science labs are undersized and don't meet the way science is taught these days. There are some undersized general classrooms as well. And many of them are kind of marginal. They don't quite meet state standards or they're slightly less than state standards. And in a renovation project, some of these things would have to be addressed. We probably wouldn't have to, recalibrate the size of these classrooms necessarily, but certainly the science labs would have to be addressed, and some of the other deficiencies in any kind of renovation project would have to be addressed. The reason the gym is red, by the way, is it's about 9,300 square feet. It could be 12,000 square feet in a new school to not just provide for PE classes, but also for practices where you could divide the gym in half and have two, full-size basketball courts. Right now, you can have cross courts, but they're kind of compromised. They're not really full-size basketball courts in that regard. That's kind of a summary of some of the issues there of what's outdated. There are some spaces missing too, like fitness and weight rooms. There's some issues at the administrative space. They don't have a good conference room. Nurses and guidance don't have proper privacy, just again because some things are kind of jammed together in the current layout. And as I said, we evaluated the physical aspects of the building too for looking at how well are things functioning today, what sort of state are they in, and a lot of materials, a lot of systems are at the end, or near the end of their life. The building's 60 years old. Some of the materials are still original there. Certainly some maintenance has been done over the years, but it's still difficult to keep up with certain things in a way to meet accessibility requirements and so forth. So there are various physical needs that would need to be addressed in any case. And these would need to be addressed even if no project happens too in the near term. And by near term, we generally say 5 to 10 years that some of these things are going to need to be addressed. That kind of summarizes it, that there has been good maintenance, but still when things are at the end of their life, it's difficult to get parts, difficult to maintain. And certainly they're not energy efficient and don't meet, those kinds of standards for, equipment, motors, and building envelope of today's standards. And the last part of the education plan was the space summary, which listed every space in the school, either existing or proposed, and quantified how many of them and what size are they. That's this set of columns. The middle set of columns is what's proposed, and the third set of columns are the state guidelines for those kinds of spaces. Because the state does want to control somewhat the size of the building and the cost of the building, since they're contributing to the cost. It's not strict. There is some room for negotiation here. Certain things are strict, like they want science rooms to be 1,440 square feet. That's just one of the hard and fast rules. Other things, they have guidelines for the size of auditorium, and you can build it bigger, but if you do, the part that's beyond their guideline is not eligible for their reimbursement. So they somewhat use this form to make sure there's parity across the state, and to keep the state's portion of the cost regulated. And again, just to remind people, we are designing for 460 students. That's the agreed upon enrollment between the district and the state. That's already been set.
And what's the enrollment today?
It's about 540, about 540. So it is declining. That number was arrived at by looking at least 10 years at demographics and trying to. There is, a little bit of a challenge in trying to estimate school choice students. That but there are some factored in there too, as we understand. And unfortunately, that number is really not up for discussion. It's been agreed to now. So this is kind of a narrative summary of what's in that space summary. The one number to keep in mind, the 128,000 is what those spaces add up to right now, and the existing building is about 114,000. So even though the enrollment is projected downward, the space required is still, the existing building is still a bit short on space in a couple different ways.
What are their energy requirements?
I'm sorry?
Their energy requirements.
As
far as energy efficiency go.
Yeah.
Like this room here is not energy efficient.
Yeah, any project that...
Neither is Nescus, so.
Any project that's funded through the MSBA needs to be a so-called green school,
Yep.
which includes being energy efficient to at least 20% greater than a base building of comparable size. So any project that comes out of this is going to be more energy efficient, certainly, than the existing school is today.
I mean, the cathedral ceilings and everything are nice, but it's not the building that teaches the kids.
Yeah.
We have to keep in mind, and energy's only gonna go up.
Exactly, and then one of the things that we want to talk about is, and have your feedback on, is what are the important criteria in analyzing these options. And operating costs, which is, energy is a big part of that.
Well, the reason I asked
It might
that,
differentiate.
the reason I asked that is it looks like they're hoping I'm building a new building anyway. I've never got an answer back how Wahconah got in such rundown conditions. It's only 60 years old.
Well, 60 years for that,
60 years.
that kind of building is a pretty good run.
For a building.
Well, certainly there are finishes that wear out less than that, and there are structures that last longer than that, but certain parts of it, they've been reasonably well maintained. That's not the issue, but if finishes start failing, they need to be replaced. That's a budget issue more than a maintenance issue.
The other thing you said is the state's requiring more square feet.
They are. It is partly these activities and the way of teaching require a bit more space, because if you sit in rows, that's one reason in the 70s you could get 1,000 kids in Wahconah, maybe because they had study halls and they packed them into the cafeteria, the library, and they packed them in the classrooms just because kids sat at desks. But to do a little bit of collaboration or moving around or project-based learning does take a little bit more space. And to offer the kind of curriculum that the district wants to continue to offer means there's a bit more variety of spaces too. It's important here, we heard that people want hands-on learning, tech ed kinds of spaces. We don't want to lose that, and so forth. So there's a little bit more variety of spaces than the school currently offers. There's only one art room. There's only one real music room. Each of those, there probably should be 2 art rooms, 2 music rooms to serve the current and projected needs. So these are the options that we started with. There's that base repair, which is not really an option in terms of a long-term solution, but it's literally just a baseline for comparison. It addresses all those things that need to be repaired. But we have 4 addition renovation options and 9 new options that we started with in that previous phase, that we generated in the previous phase. And we generated sort of conceptual floor plans and site plans, and we thought about phasing for each one of those. And so we used a form like this where we had all 13 of them listed here. Then we looked at how well does it meet the educational goals? How well does it utilize the existing building and site? How well, or how does it, how is it implemented? How does it disrupt or cause issues with phasing or temporary costs? And after we went through that analysis on these 13 preliminary ones, we've narrowed it down. So here are the 4 addition renovation options that we looked at. And after that preliminary analysis, we're down to 2. And we have these plans on the tables tonight. You can look at them a little closer now. I'll briefly walk through them as well. So there's 2 addition renovation options. The first one is one that keeps the entire existing building except for the modulars. Those necessarily have to be removed. They're out, beyond their lifespan. And it proposes 1 bit of new construction at the end of one corridor. Both corridors rather, so it's no longer a dead-end corridor. It kind of makes a loop now of circulation there. And the floor plan for this looks like this. So we're adding, this bit of space here, which has classroom, science labs, and some open space. One of the things you'll notice in this plan, we've kept the circulation where it is, but we're proposing taking down a few selective walls in places to create some open space adjacent to classrooms. And we've also distributed science labs to try to get closer to that notion of the classroom clusters. So there are teacher planning rooms distributed in the building as well, additional student toilet rooms around the buildings there as well. So we're trying to map that diagram onto the existing building, and in this case, do it with as little kind of reconfiguration, you might say, where we're saving basically the 4 walls of the building. But all of the systems would be new and renovated, the entire window system, the roof would be replaced, and so on. The core spaces would remain basically where they are: the gym, the cafeteria, the auditorium, the library, media center. Each of them would be renovated. They would need to be renovated as much as possible during the summers to avoid having any downtime, because the building is going to be occupied during the construction here. The way it would get implemented, this part could be built first while the entire existing school stays in operation, and then the students and teachers could occupy that and vacate some other part of the building. We anticipate that this amount of space isn't going to be enough to really make this flow, that you'd probably add some temporary classrooms as well, so that you could free up an entire corridor, say. And the students could be on this side of the building, and these become dead-end corridors that are closed off, and the contractor is accessing from this side. So we always want to safely segregate the construction from the occupancy, and it would take a couple different phases to get that done, and probably, in our estimation, 3 school years of work to fully renovate the building, and including maximizing the amount of work that's done in the summers. And the way it would look, obviously, 3-dimensionally, is basically a continuation of the existing school, just closing off that end there, and it doesn't really disrupt the existing soccer field. The entire site, more or less, would stay the same layout with the drop-off in front, the parking, and the fields where they are. But things would get renovated as needed. For instance, there's some drainage issues and some sidewalk issues and accessibility that need to be improved, but the basic layout would remain the same. So that's number 1, addition renovation number 1. Number 4 is a lot more drastic. It's sort of the other end of the spectrum, where this is more like what Mount Greylock is doing, saving the auditorium and gym and what's currently the administration area, saving that portion of the building and renovating them, and building all new academic areas. In this case, they kind of wrap around the gym and a new administration and a new main entrance. And once those are built, then the remainder of the existing school is demolished and playing fields put in their place. And that allows this by the way would be a two-story addition, just to be more compact and to sort of more follow that small school feel. These clusters obviously are now much closer to the idealized diagram that was in the ed plan, where there's, science labs are distributed, a mixture of classroom sizes, teacher planning rooms, some open collaborative space, and in the center of the building would be the student commons on the ground floor and the learning commons on the second floor.
Question, Carl?
Oh, yes,
Question.
sir.
I'm the emergency management director of this community.
Mm-hmm.
You have Cleveland Reservoir, which is an earthen dam, which is by definition a high hazard dam, right above the school.
Mm-hmm.
Has any consideration been given to that? Because if that dam goes, everybody's going to be doing the backstroke.
Well, who's responsible for that dam? Is it locally
City of
controlled
Pittsfield.
or the state?
City of Pittsfield.
Uh-huh. Well, we haven't considered that as part of our scope. Obviously, it's beyond our property and all, but certainly it's good to consider what activities here could affect that. We don't want to worsen it, with any kind of vibration excavation or something that could travel that far to affect that. But
It's about a mile away.
yeah. But one of the considerations is the proximity to the river and the wetlands and staying out of the flood zone in that regard, so that we're building and we're considering, raising the footprint of the building to a safe location in any case, so
I thought the
that
intent
we're not
was
on the low site.
I thought the intent was to move the new facility over towards the Nessica side.
We'll show you some of those in a second.
That's under the new construction, I think.
Yeah. So
That's what this is, right out loud.
this is mostly new, right? This is mostly new construction. But save some, like I said, it's more along the strategy that Mount Greylock is using in their high school. Here's what it would look like. So you got the auditorium, the gym, and then a two-story addition on that portion. And once the school comes down, the baseball field and practice field, soccer field could be built in that location. New parking areas, new drop-off areas there. But it's similar in configuration. This is still the entrance for cars and buses here. And some parking is in front of the school, some parking is wrapping around the other two sides of the school. And there's entrances on both sides that come into a common lobby. Here are the options we've looked at for new construction, or the zones, let's call it. 6 basic different zones of open space so that construction could happen in some way and keep the existing school in operation. And when we looked at it, there were more than one option on some of these sites, so that we ended up with 9 different options here. So the numbers indicate the locations on the site. So that number 1 is that location in front of the school. Number 6 is way to the back of the school on the football field. 5 is the soccer field. 4 is kind of the practice field alongside the school, and so forth. 2 is the parking lot. 3 is the baseball field, more or less, in shorthand. But again, we applied those earlier criteria to these to narrow the list somewhat. And after doing that, we're down to these 3 locations, these 3 options here, and with one variation. We added a slight variation to 2A to look at different footprints, but the building is in the same location. 1 is in front of the school, where the drop-off is, and the green area in front of the school. 2 is kind of the parking lot, a little bit onto the baseball field. 3 is the parking lot and mostly the baseball field. And the ones to the back towards Nessicus, there were several drawbacks to those. 1, that land back there is kind of low, it's wet and subject to flooding. And 2, it's a long way from the road, so there'd be longer driveways, longer utility runs that are more expensive and to build and maintain. And 3, they didn't, despite those disadvantages, there were no advantages to the way they utilized the site. We ended up with driveways and roadways that kind of split the site in half. You'd have pedestrians crossing roadways to get to the athletic fields. these all somewhat in similar ways consolidate the green areas of the site and zone the site more efficiently than those ones in the back did. So options 4, 5, and 6 weren't seen as advantageous to carry any further in comparison to these. So these are the ones we'd like you to consider tonight as we talk further and break up into smaller groups around the table. We can look at the plans in detail, but again, just to quickly show you these where they are. Number one is in front of the school, very close to the existing building. It's sort of a linear scheme, fairly narrow in order to fit there, but there's still a drop-off for buses and some parking for visitors and a main entrance that faces the street. The balance of the parking is to the top of the slide there.
Is there any consideration for solar?
There is,
Solar electricity?
in all of these, there'll probably be a great opportunity either through low slope or flat roofs that we could have an extensive array of PV panels on the roof. And we've heard that from a lot of folks, not just that, but overall to think of the building as being as energy efficient as possible, perhaps even what's known as net zero, where the building generates as much energy as it uses.
More like we're working on.
So here's what that would look like. Again, we're showing this as a massing model. It won't necessarily have all flat roofs, although it could. But essentially the academic area is 2-story, and then these are high 1-story volumes for the gym, the auditorium, the cafeteria, and then surrounded by 1-story areas. This option, number 2, 2A, is in a way has similar components but arranged differently and obviously located more where the existing parking lot is and partially where the baseball field is. The entrance would still be where it is. The drop-off is almost exactly where it is today. It just is aimed now at this new entrance plaza as opposed to that entrance into the existing school. But half of the parking would be located here in front of the school, the other half wrapping around the school there. And the way the floor plan works is here's the front door, here's administration and student services, coming into a common lobby with the commons area, the cafeteria, but that's also the lobby for the auditorium and the gym, associated music and locker rooms. And then the other half of the building, which could be closed off right at that point, are the academic areas organized into clusters on 2 stories with the learning commons in the center. And the variation to that, and the second floor is only on that portion of the building, kind of mirrors the first floor. Here's what it looks like 3-dimensionally. 2 stories here, 1 story in the middle, and then the higher volumes there for the auditorium and gym. The variation on this 2A.1 is to close off this courtyard and kind of have a loop circulation. There's some advantages to that from a flow point of view, some feel. There's some security advantages to allowing kids out there and you know they're going to be there, and likewise intruders coming in is seen as an issue with an open courtyard, so that's one reason we're pursuing this one as well, to consider this as a variation on that.
Where does the state stand on that, on the security thing?
They recognize that.
Let's be totally honest and upfront here, for intruders.
Yeah, they recognize it's kind of, it's obviously a very important issue. They don't want to dictate exactly what everyone should do. They want to leave it up to the local districts, but they want to ensure that everyone talks about it and thinks about it, and it's a requirement in our submissions that we show how we've addressed it.
I prefer that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah, so people have a similar reaction. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want an open area, you know, that allows
Potentially,
outside
right.
access. This way it's locked in.
Yeah.
Is Trooper Canada and Chief Cole looked at those drawings for that application?
We're actually going to talk to them. Yeah, we talked to them on Taconic.
Well, that sounds good.
And we're going to do it here too. One of the differences, I just want to point out, I mean, there is the thought that if you have an open court, you can still fence it in. The idea with the open is to have view, so that it could be fenced.
Both Trooper Canada and Chief Cole have been consulting on some of these designs already, and they
Okay.
weren't too thrilled about the ones backed by Nescus.
Right,
Security
right.
units.
From a security point of view, that's another
They
point,
prefer-
difficult
Close one, right?
to observe
Well,
and
you gotta go
supervise.
through the building to get to the court.
We haven't talked about those specific existing exactly where the building was on the
Yeah,
property.
yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. So
Yeah.
that's-
But yeah,
Yeah. In all cases too, notice we do indicate kind of a path around the building. That would be paved or certainly drivable, both for fire and for police to supervise. So typically, we always want to have access around the building for supervision. And then the third new option is a similar footprint to the one that was in front here, but it's oriented a little differently. And to some, for some reason, that's a little bit of a negative in that north is to the left here, towards the golf course. And so that means that this major corridor here is running north-south. So these classrooms on either side of it, even though they're in clusters, they're predominantly facing one way and the other, are facing east and west. From an energy point of view, that's not the most advantageous. From a natural light and glare, that's not the most advantageous. It's better to be, for the corridor to be east-west and the classroom to be oriented north and south. You can control the sun better. If you notice today, even late in the afternoon, the sun comes through at a low angle. It can really overheat spaces. It happens now at Wahconah on the western exposure classrooms. They get overheated. Teachers pull the shades to try to cut it down.
Your new building should have high-grade E-glass.
It should, and it will, and tinted glass too. That helps. But still, it's even better. It's even better if we can orient it north-south too. So there's that same plan. Again, you can see how the components are basically arranged similarly in terms of adjacencies. It's just a question of how they're oriented on the site that varies these and where they are on the site. And when we locate the building here, we've now got more parking here, in the front of the school by that entrance. Now the green area is extending this way, closer to the street here. And it would be fenced in, and obviously we keep soccer balls, well back from the road, that sort of thing. But the building is entered differently than it is now. Right now, the entrance drive is about here at this bend in the road. This option pushes it up further
What's that do with
east.
your parking? You got one there. I can't see any large parking areas.
Yep, there's a large parking area here and another large parking area here. So all of these, we should say, all of the new construction options, the building is basically the same size in each case in terms of square footage. The parking is basically the same number of cars in each case. And the athletic fields are basically the same number of athletic fields in each
I bring up
case.
one issue.
Of the new construction options.
Are these all flat tops?
Not necessarily at this point. That's not inherent in any of the options, that they have to be flat roof versus slope roof. But that's a discussion for a future time. So these are the criteria that we utilize, have come up with the building committee and with actually prior community input. And we've organized it into this matrix. There's some around the room. It looks like this. So we've taken those criteria and put them into 8 different categories. But, and it's kind of organized with the most important ones first and the least important ones down here. And then the 5 options, you might add the 6th one here, 2A.1, but the 5 options are here. Again, the color scheme here in terms of grading is the darker green is the most advantageous, the red is the least advantageous, yellow is kind of neutral in analyzing them. And we do have a line here for cost. The top row of numbers in there is the construction cost, and the larger numbers are the project cost, because those are 2 different things, right? Construction cost is the hard, construction materials, the bricks and mortar and concrete. The project cost includes everything. It's sort of a turnkey cost. So the cost of furniture, the cost of computers and network in the building, our fees, the owner's project manager's fees, the cost of bonding the project, and the contingencies too, because it's always prudent, of course, in anything this significant and complex to have proper contingencies as well. So typically this project cost is about 20 to 30% more than the construction cost. And a couple things to notice in that regard. One, they're all stated as ranges because we can't be very specific yet. We haven't developed that level of detail yet to be able to say precisely what each of these options, and there's too many variables still within the option. But, and also they're meant to be sort of order of magnitude numbers for comparison purposes, so that it helps thinking about the scale of this and one option relative to another. One thing to notice, as I mentioned, because the new options are all relatively the same size and relatively the same amount of parking and field, the costs are relatively the same in the sense of not being a differentiator between one versus the other right now. There is difference between the addition renovation options, and again, we still need to fine tune these numbers, but the pure construction cost of the addition renovation is likely to be less than the pure construction cost of the new. But when we start figuring long-term value, operating cost and maintenance, some of that may be modified going forward. And the other thing to notice, this first column is that base repair. And again, without doing too much detail yet, we still put that in the category of almost up to $40 million over the next 5 to 10 years to correct all those things that are deficient. And it's possible or likely that if nothing were to happen in regard to a new project, the district would still be responsible, obviously, for maintaining the building, repairing it, bringing it up to standards. And most likely, this would not be reimbursable by the state. These costs would be reimbursable by the state if they were part of, a major construction project. And that reimbursement, by the way, right now the rate for the district is about 54%, but it's only 54% of eligible costs. We need to warn people, you can't simply take this number and multiply it by 46% and say that's going to be the district's cost, because there are several parts of the project that are not eligible for reimbursement, and so it lowers the effective reimbursement rate. Yes.
Okay, we rebuild whatever option you take.
Yeah.
Does that price include taking the old one down?
It does. It does. That's why it's a turnkey cost.
Let me finish the question.
Yep.
What part of that is the state going to cover? Is that a part of the
They'll cover that.
reimbursable? They will?
They will.
Or demolish?
There are parts that are not eligible for reimbursement. For instance, if there are old asbestos floor tile in there, that's 100% on the district cost. That's not eligible for reimbursement.
Okay.
If-
I'm trying to make sure everybody understands that.
Yeah, also for the site cost.
Criteria that was built in.
Yeah, there are definitely some hazardous materials that
Yeah.
gotta come out of there
And
before the building's
won't
demolished.
They won't.
And they won't reimburse for that.
They won't.
Likewise, the site costs to build fields and parking lot, they will reimburse for them, but only up to a limit. And that limit is 8% of the building cost. And again, that's a sort of artificially low number. In our experience, we've built a lot of schools. The cost of site work in a normal site, even when we're close to the road and have short utility runs and all, is more like 10 to 12% as a minimum, more often 15%.
And that's not your woods if you want
So-
it to hold up.
Yep, so we know there are going to be some costs. And an even bigger category is the cost per square foot for construction costs. The state caps that too right now at $333 a square foot. And the cost of new construction, we're doing Taconic, as was mentioned, with Skanska right now. And when we think about inflation, is more likely $450 a square foot, not $333. So right off the top, that's going to lower your effective reimbursement rate. So it's probably more prudent to think about it not as 54%, but something like 40% or even lower is what the state is going to contribute to this, just to be, realistic and upfront about
I
this.
mean, you gotta be above it. There's just so many variables,
Yeah, that's one reason we
Well,
want
the reason is
yeah.
I don't think it's official inside information, it's just that Taconic has turned into sort of a nightmare.
Wasn't it?
That's what, just feedback I've heard.
Well, I'm there every day, I'm just
I think, cost-wise.
completely on budget.
It is on the budget?
It's on schedule, on budget, under budget.
Cool.
Yeah. So,
All these people could be scared because I guess Pittsfield's up to the sewer again or something.
Yeah, they're a wastewater treatment plant. There's all kinds, there's a guy out there in Pittsfield that has a website, which is erroneous information. That's
Like
stuff.
YouTube.
Yeah. So what we'd like to do is I know there's a few building committee members here too, but there's obviously some citizens too. Maybe if we could just break into two groups so that we could sort of configure ourselves like this, gather around the table, we can look a little closer at the plans, look a little closer at those charts, and get your feedback. We'll have somebody recording at each table, so you won't miss out, and then we'll come back together at the last 5 minutes or so of this. So we'd like to spend, at least 20, 30 minutes in the small group, and then share the evaluation criteria, the pros and cons, or if you've got a favorite right now, let us know. But more importantly, tell us why it's your favorite, what is important to you in analyzing these, because that, goes all into making that next step of trying to narrow these options down to one preferred one. So I think we could push these two tables together and gather around this set of blocks and push those two tables together and gather around those. Use these nice elementary school sized chairs.
It's up there.
10. Oh, sorry, what's the projected timeline of this being built?
It's actually right on the,
Yeah, we say about, about 2 years, 2 school years maybe would be affected by new construction. 3 school years would be affected by renovation.
Need more tape.
so if you were doing the math,
Oh, where about that?
post May of next year.
Yep.
Did we have that over here, Vlad? There we are.
So that's kind of right.
Spring. March year after the
So what do you feel are the important
Well, yeah, I mean,
issues that we need to consider
Still has a
here
good
to try and decide
plan
which
for
option
that
it is?
And a recent study from the Corps of Engineers
That's one of the
regarding what should be
Well,
done. We're gonna,
background.
invest in $80 million
I was on the School Building Needs Commission when we did Pittsfield High School, we renovated Pittsfield High School
In the 70s.
in the 70s.
Yeah.
And that took 1 year. Now, the Dave Terry needs job, they gave me 2 years to get it done. You're talking 2 years, if I understood you correctly, of moving students around.
We're gonna build.
3 years.
Three-
Probably in the-
Okay, 2 to 3 years.
That's
chaos.
It can be disruptive. Sometimes people say, well, the teachers and the students It is disruptive, that's one of our criteria here, that's this category, that's why the addition of innovation is kind of that end of the spectrum, right, Mark, as opposed to in that category?
Sure, something.
Well, if you build a new facility,
Normally,
are you
we
gonna
have
have
to
the
have
students
an
in one
indicated
facility in transition?
Exactly. So it's least disruptive to the students, depending on where it is.
Because you got like,
I mean, number one, it's kind of close to the building, although fortunately it's close to the blank walls of the gym. It won't be too disruptive during the construction activity. Because it's sitting on the drop-off area and parking area, we have to build new temporary parking and drop-off areas during construction.
Well,
That's been a
exactly.
problem for Chief Cole.
we have to have.
So
We'll look into that.
some people feel options 2 and 3, they're a little more removed from the school, where you can completely build a new school, build most of the new parking, and leave the existing school in operation, mostly undisturbed, except for the loss of the baseball during the one year. But you actually gain a field in the end, plus parking.
It was the first time it was brought
Yeah,
up.
the parking itself. No, you can't lose, because it's under the footprint of the existing building, so it doesn't get built till the end of the construction sequence when you demolish the building. Yeah, they're both under the footprint of the existing building, so that's the one disruption. Oh yeah, there's still another baseball field, that exists today, but there's one today, right up front. Yep. The fields that aren't colored in, the track and football field, are undisturbed. Are undisturbed. That's the key there. Yep.
The main benefit of this option is that
Actually, it makes more use of the,
subdivided for site or
60 years.
some people talking about the softball
Doing inspections.
on 2 more cameras. And instead of
so in that respect, it's efficient.
once the skills are assuming the building's in building.
Yeah.
Then they're just moved out.
Construction.
So you could put
So
in,
we need to think about
If you put
what
in
happens
baseball,
50 years from now. I mean,
Or
the
you
building
could
is
also
40, 50 years.
consider
So the
putting
fact
that
that it affects
softball field.
existing building for 40 years should be considered, may not be the main consideration.
You get that vote yet?
Yeah. No, it's actually 2 or 3.
This is
So it's right there. If you look at those fields.
So this building is finished, and then school moves to the right building, and it will take another,
One of the other things, just, they meant to slide on top of each other, that's okay. Just like we prefer this orientation for classrooms, we prefer this orientation for fields and for the baseball field too, from the layout. They make a little more sense being yes, because it's right now, if you're the goalie here, the west sun is in your eyes, it's kind of a handicap for the team going in that direction. Yeah, or you flip at halftime, but still. And likewise, baseball, right now, it's, home plate is here. The west sun is potentially being on the side. Yeah, like the Pittsfield Suns, baseball, yes. More compact.
It's enclosed, but it's not closed by the building. Oh, there it is, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Long hallways, 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Shorter hallways.
It's more compact. And luckily too, one of the things that's evolving in schools seems to be longer periods, so there's less passing, in the hallways. If you go to extended or block scheduling, you might, instead of having 45 or 50-minute classes, you might have 90-minute classes, and then you only change 3 times a day, not 6.
You can build the parking in the front.
Yeah, well, I mean,
yes.
what we've done in some recent schools, there's a floor plan under there too. One of these, there it is, yeah. What we've done recently, one of the reasons that to segregate, the public side and the academic side, we have a control fund right here. There'd actually be a set of doors there, across there typically. And in some projects recently, we have it that we can remotely close and lock those during the lockdown. You don't have to walk up to it physically. Well, not necessarily, it's not required, but it's really good practice. Yeah, that's it. Well, I don't know if you know, it's made in Hinsdale, school guard glass, have you heard of that?
No.
There's a vendor, it's not bulletproof. You gotta be careful. It's bullet resistant, and it's more intruder resistant. If you take a baseball bat to it, it would take you you get tired in 45 minutes maybe.
It takes 45 minutes for a response.
Right. Even trying to shoot your way through, a bullet might eventually penetrate, but to get it to fall out so. We do recommend that, at major entrances, and sometimes even entirely on the ground floor. It's expensive. It's considered, but it's an option.
What's the tech area?
Yeah, okay.
don't think that who's buying this or anything.
That's
It's
one of
like
the
they're
things that's evolving
just-
to standard right now. They
You know, I know, just
They
another.
get that view out of
That's
the
kind of
front, and they get
getting
that
less.
view-
No, it's
It's not a great picture, I'm looking at this.
Yeah, the
Trees
size
and
of the
buildings.
buildings.
Space and
It's a
going
beautiful
on
picture,
equipment,
but
Yeah.
it's a beautiful picture, country,
So,
up here all the time, and most of
one of the
these kids have an
challenges
hour
that
bus
might
ride with
involve
people
more
working country.
like small engine repair or some other kind of, it's still important to have hands-on learning and taking things apart, putting them together and so forth. So one of the spaces might be small engine repairs. The other tech ed space might be called pre-engineering or engineering kind of thing. Or again, you're probably still building things every now, but you're also working on computers. So there's probably a clean part of the room and a dirty part of the room. Yes. Yes, exactly. We support that kind of
Computer design.
yeah.
Something that would.
Yeah, and the third type of tech ed room might be called more robotics. Kids are assembling that, and again, so right now, that's what's in the program, right? Three tech
That's actually.
for hands-on learning. We've heard good feedback. Yes, traditional. I mean, there'd probably still be a table saw, there'd still be a drill press, there'd still be some of the small tools. Yeah,
With it being put on that program design, so it's what it's based on.
yeah.
I guess one small advantage is that
Classroom.
if you wanted
Yeah, and one of the
to.
thoughts is too, it's somewhat intentional that they might be located like next to,
Now you have.
you know, a space like this. You know, we won't call it a library in the future probably, but kids may work on a project where they actually want to build something. They go next door, you know, maybe there's a connecting door and supervise the kids in there, and they put something together. So who knows, a history project, maybe to build a skill policy and talk about it, or join with Latin class,
Even if there's
or
no
things like
real door
that.
out
And
there,
some
just
kids
take
learn better
something
with
to go
hands-on
class.
learning. So we want to make sure there are opportunities for that to happen.
Well, the
Yeah,
kids-
that's a
the
good-
kids want to buy out the-
That's another reason that this is called Learning Commons.
I went to school in
There's
Springfield.
those kind of activities, just with headphones and looking at computers and they're learning, I don't know, Russian from some professor in Wisconsin. Yeah, so to do that, you can't have a big open space, sometimes you want to have some kind of counters or at least, again, maybe glass fronted, smaller, small group rooms. So you can supervise the kids, but, you know, because you don't want to have, you don't want to have, you know, 5 teachers in there, you want to have 1 or 2 that they can keep an eye on things.
Well, you think that's becoming in the future? Instead of busing kids back and forth to get everything.
Yeah.
Well,
Cost is almost the same, and the timeline is twice. Did I miss something?
Yeah.
It's the whole
Yeah.
school year, right?
you know, that's,
Yep.
that's just on the school side.
One of the things that was mentioned,
Your cubicles and getting classes from something that would be done.
yeah.
Well, this
Yeah.
one, you can compare
This is, yeah, that's,
Yeah.
well, one of the
So
things
it's
too
64 million versus
that
81
we don't want to lose sight of is, as architects, we're very sensitive to student people say, well, if you can learn everything online, why even come to school? Why do you need school buildings? They'll just stay home, they go on whatever there's still something about, one, social emotional development and learning interpersonal
That's a
skills.
good point, because you can read a book on
I'm not
your
sure I
tablet,
understand the.
and you won't get much out of this as a
Yeah.
fiction book.
You know, we all have phones,
And they don't know
I can
why.
get a wealth of information, you know, at my fingertips, but that's just information, that's not necessarily learning. Right, so we want to make sure there are places, still, where you can have access. And, you know, we're gonna have Wi-Fi everywhere, I'm sure, in here, probably outside too, so you can get access to the internet. But we still want places where, you know, collaboration, where people come together, to work on a project, or teachers come together, those kinds of
I feel
things.
bad disrupting the current, I feel bad disrupting the current school in order to make a better
You know,
school.
a spread out, single
I don't know
story.
that I necessarily
Yeah.
feel
My
$20 million
experience is
bad,
that
but I
with a
also
single
feel
story
that we're
spread
not
out,
getting
more
the end product is any different.
Yeah, more foundation,
I went to
more roof.
1997.
This is a little more compact, less foundation, less excavation.
That's not even.
A little bit more efficient from an energy point of view.
That's not-
Right, exactly. I think the most efficient thing we could do from an energy point of view is build a sphere.
Yeah.
That would house the most volume with the least surface area. We can't build buildings like that, so it would be useful, but we get closer, the more compact we can get. So 2 stories makes sense there. We did have one of those options I didn't talk about, that we earlier, was a 1-story option. But it just didn't make sense, it didn't fit the site very well. Even though you think of it as a big site, if you start trying to put a sprawling 1-story building on there, well, the existing one, it didn't fit very well, we were a bit tight.
I
mean, that's all I see.
Yes. No, the front part is 2 stories. Yeah, they're all 2 stories. They're all 2 stories. Yeah.
But this is a little more spread out.
That's linear, right? Yeah, the first thing we're saying is we're worried about security, maybe we put a fence with gates, but we could still self-contain. We kind of we're looking at what these lines are, at the views. We wanted, views from here, not just, if you have a courtyard, you give a view of a 2-story wall. Maybe a little sky, yeah, maybe a little sky, but it's secure. Maybe we can achieve that secure. The more important thing is to think about, is the circulation flow, is the flow, more important. One of the, this is all students are traveling here. This is a common area. Maybe this, obviously it would be wide enough to serve the traffic. It wouldn't be the same as other quarters, but at least it's a shared path. Maybe the students feel more part of one school that way. Everybody travels this way to get to the auditorium or the gym or the cafeteria. There's a little bit of different feel to it than if you have the loop. I don't know. It's kind of a subjective thing. Yeah, that's right there. So if you're in that pod going to the gym or cafeteria, you can use that corridor. If you're in that pod, you can use that corridor. There'll actually be less traffic on that other one. It's going up and down the gate.
If we can't do this plan.
Well, again, we obviously want to make sure that whatever is built, the width is wide enough for the anticipated traffic flow, so there's no bottleneck. From a safety point of view, people talk about, well, is this an issue of having an open courtyard? So we'd want to address that. If that were
Unforeseen costs.
Yeah, much more directly active down
It's not a whole
there.
bunch of, open up pools and kind of still
Well, the
Right.
auditorium, we have a question, you only get that auditorium
contingency within this
for
budget.
600.
This is
No,
550,
new construction.
which is still more than
So if you have a school
anticipated
event,
population.
5%.
I know Art, I know everything is, the enrollment's not.
And for information,
For every one
expect
child.
that number to be down.
2 parents?
So,
Yeah.
you
Sure.
you say reservation.
One of the,
maybe.
so basically, the way the MSBA does its reimbursement,
I think it's 5
is
between.
for a certified
There's 2
enrollment for
contingencies.
60, which we
There's
have.
some contingency enrollment.
The MSBA would reimburse up to roughly 300 seats. So it would end up being a very small auditorium, actually. Think
I
about
mean,
it.
our only good news about what's behind the wall, that it is only 60 years.
The school building
So I
committee,
mean, the
the
bones,
consensus
the bones
was
from the, building should
to make an
be
effort
100 years
to
old.
avoid our auditorium,
Viable, but we know that there are
Partial
extra
commercial.
materials that are in
that
quarters,
could seat
and
the
we don't know
entire
how
school
long it's been
population.
for. That maybe is the next.
We're 5
biggest
or
concern
40.
in terms of-
So
that's
where the 550 came from.
Okay, so we would be responsible for a little bit more cost.
Right, exactly. It would
But
be.
we're gonna end up, this has gotta be figured out somewhere along the line. You start giving figures.
Well, one of the things, this is just me speaking as a principal, is that if, let's say we moved into this model, I think a conversation needs to be had about, is the district representative?
Oh,
Budget cuts, sort of thing. Because really, there's only
place.
gonna be 3 other auditoriums in
Well, I'm not seeing the green and I'm not
One
seeing the
big
savings
cut,
for the taxpayers.
which is, in spite, in spite
Because
of.
if it goes to the high end of that, last time I checked, the 81.1 million is actually greater than 80.5 and 81.1 and 80.8. So if it goes to the high end, it's actually
So,
the most
I mean,
expensive
I think this will be a sought after venue.
So I end up with it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think it would be, I think people would be interested in
I don't think
using
that
vacant space.
Is there any consideration for generators
I
here?
don't think it
Oh, yeah.
serves us, the fact.
Generally, all our schools at this point, they're required to have emergency lighting, and the most economical way to do it with a generator, because then you can power more than just your lights.
Yeah, I'm talking full capacity, I just don't mean under lighting.
Generally, we don't see that where the district, because there's power out in the district, chances are they wouldn't have school. They just want safety to get people out. Well, we do see people powering assembly areas, so that if there were community blackout, there'd be like in the gym, the cafeteria, the kitchen would be powered, so that you could use it as a shelter.
There you go, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, but you don't need to power the classroom, or you don't need to power the, the ventilation units that are on the rooftop. It's a big number.
Actually, that we have here.
Yes, we could, size the generator to handle, those kind of areas. Make sure they're convenient outlets for people to charge their phones. Right, I'm sure it should be. It's, one of the few large gathering places.
Well, that's the thing, because it has been identified for Windsor, Peru, Hinsdale, and Dalton. And I sat down with the previous superintendent with the former Dalton EMD. And his jaw was on the ground. He did not know.
This school is not sure.
It was identified as a shelter in the plan.
No, he
Kittredge is done.
meant Kittredge, when he said this school, not papers, not this piece of paper.
No, it's too close to the tracks.
Yeah.
My chair's still up there.
So I mean, do we, right, so that
Tracks are 2 hazardous.
Railroad tracks.
I was fire chief at the time.
Have you ever seen the orange book, catch up and show you the orange. I'm talking half a mile either side.
My daughter's there,
So,
program.
we haven't heard that issue about the reservoir before.
It's over here.
Have there been studies that show that there's, issues or rules that's deficient or becoming deficient?
By definition, being an earthen dam, it is considered a high hazard dam, contact dam safe for Boston fabrics.
Have there been studies done to show what would happen?
Every 2 years, I have no idea, but I'm sure somebody does.
Okay.
They have to do a study every 2 years, and it's dam inspection. So the city of Pittsfield should be able to produce that book.
yeah, so I mean, if the
Dan Phillips, Dan Phillips, he might be able to. He is the former police chief, and he's the emergency management director at Dalton.
things that aren't as easy to,
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know.
run
I don't know
multiple times, so we're not.
that it's gonna affect us
putting on
that
play
precisely
or-
here, where to cite it.
Can't outrun it.
No, we
Right,
just
so
can't block it.
play with
You can't block it either.
certain things
But
you
if
can
the
do
first
with
floor has
multiples,
hurricane
but
glass or
things
something,
you
then
can't do with
at least there's
multiples.
some.
I think we just have to think about that total capacity.
And as we said, the issue on the site, also the groundwater levels, we want to make sure they're fairly close to the surface as we get close to the river, which is at the bottom of the pin here, down here. You notice there are practice fields here now, but not really legit fields because they kind of slope as we come up. So we want to make sure that wherever we site, we're high and dry as best we can out of any potential fires.
So that,
Construction
like,
moves
the
this
senior
either towards the
ceremony
front
and
or to the
the
side.
senior what's
It's
the,
gonna
what
give
are
you-
the, like, rules regarding who the kids can
It's
invite?
gonna give you your fields.
Right. Game fields. I mean,
That
theoretically.
level, we know what that level sits at right now, I don't know what that.
If you look underneath
Yeah.
the plan, that's where the.
Right, that's what I'm saying, we're gonna have it, we know that level already.
Yeah.
So, there is no,
Right, and
I'm
we're
not
doing
saying there's
some,
no chance of it not going on.
we're doing some exploratory borings
But I
right
mean,
now.
that's the way that's the way that the
Determine
bigger
not just
schools
what
have.
the quality of the soil is, but also where the groundwater levels
In the
are.
city, is, you know, you have a limited number of seats, like even
G1s we're gonna have to do.
in Springfield where the schools
Well,
don't.
how many
hold
G1s
students,
we're gonna have to do with them,
you know,
seeing
in
that it's
downtown, you
basically the
still
same
get like
property,
2 tickets or
not the same footprint.
That's-
Well, I don't know,
Something about
Which one is it?
That's one way to.
Number 3? Yeah, that's one, it's the same footprint, per 90 degrees, basically, so it's still 2 stories.
And
this is like classroom.
Yeah, this is exactly. So the issue here that was pointed out somewhat is that the parking is under the existing building, so when you first occupy this, you'll have this parking, you know, and you can get in this front door. And we'll probably have a road that goes like this, back to some temporary parking over here, for the first year. Once the building comes down, this can be built.
So we probably already end up
So the
with
phasing is a little more extended.
The
Spending more money,
But this temporary
use
use.
No reason.
than this one, where, just slide it into that one. On this one, where you can build all this parking stuff right now. In front of the school, because it's just green area. You keep the drop off area, this is pretty, this, like I said, this is exactly where the drop off is now, up to this point, then it sort of turns this way. You can get virtually all the parking built when the school is done. And then, so the contractor can be, you know, more efficiently tearing down the building, building the fields all in one phase, and we're not throwing away any money, we're building temporary parking.
I can tell you it's
Right.
stayed
So-
steady.
because those.
That's
High
a
school
slight
also could
advantage
still
to,
put some of the kids.
this is like one for 2A or 2S versus 3. Less temporary expense.
Well, right, because the kids on mine in the back, they're out.
Yeah, there's really all yeah, we have all,
The same way that you guys get.
The
kids
addition
from
renovations
Hinsdale that
down here,
opt
too.
in, you guys get kids from North
yeah,
Adams.
these aren't getting too much support as we talked to folks here. Even though the cost might be slightly less at first, what you end up with in the end is not, doesn't provide the long-term benefit.
And I don't know how much longer Lee's gonna
Operating
continue to
costs
take
are
his
gonna be
medical
higher.
choice students because they're not losing
Slightly
population.
higher.
They don't have as many OTs as they used to because they keep having this
And
conversation.
when you
with themselves
figure
about
your
whether
labor
they're gonna
rates,
allow Otis to
you're talking
do
2 to
this,
3
whether
years,
they're
prevailing
doing
wage
it.
is gonna go bananas by then.
Oh, yeah,
So it's not their own.
You
you
factor
know,
that in.
we don't have a crystal ball, but we estimated some escalation.
But they don't
Yeah.
fund a middle
And
school
you're
or a
right,
high school.
for that.
They get their choice of whether they're going to Great Barrington or Otis, that's the way it's long been.
But we
since
had
my kids were
anticipated that the
born,
project, you know, happens
they
on a
continue
certain
to have this
schedule.
conversation
Like we
about,
said,
are we
we're
gonna
not,
let
it's not
kids
indefinite,
just automatically
obviously,
switch choices
but
to
that,
Otis, or are we gonna set up for
if the
a
vote were to happen next spring or
They're
2019, we would then finish up the drawings to go out to bid by that fall or winter
push out
and
of
start
like the
construction
Stockbridge
the
area
following spring
and the
when
Lennox
weather
area
breaks.
a little bit because of all of the
in March,
Airbnbs that
April,
are out there.
they don't get the view.
Their houses are actually worth
the view out of the court.
and residences. So
It's
the
true,
residents
it's
are getting
outside.
pushed
Fresh air is a.
and like low end leads
Yeah, but-
in our direction.
I don't know, even here, it just gives that sense
People looking
that
for more rental
you're not
than
really
they ever
outside.
have before because
You
of
know,
the
you walk by the
Airbnb.
courtyard here, it's sort of, you're not
So,
outside.
do
You
you
know,
think
you're sort of-
Yeah, I mean,
You're looking at the
The
wall.
difference with or without the courtyard is that if you didn't have the courtyard,
choice for.
for the kids, we would have to build specs, the kids.
So I don't think we want to ask the taxpayers to fund
Yeah,
more
of
school
course,
choice in general.
For safety purposes.
I just think that we want to look at the space.
Like a fence,
and say,
or
if we
expectations
had
about
to,
when you
or
can
if
and can't
we
be out
chose
there,
to
you know, that sort of.
add
Right,
15
if it's
extra
enclosed
students or
courtyard,
20
then
extra students, or 20 extra kind of happen as fast as we're.
Meaning they could be out there
Are
more.
there big events that we would then?
So it's just, it would just be, you know, you can kind of adapt your.
Or that we could have housed ourselves if we didn't have 20.
Right, I sort of like the idea of being able to
I think
project
that's the
out
question I want to
everything that's
ask,
within the wall.
but I don't know what that cost is, so I mean, I'm not really talking about cost.
You know,
I
that's
asked
the same George Courtyard, I don't know if it is.
No, I did the tour with you guys.
So we have the two courtyards, there's one down.
Yeah, you can see, the proposed courtyard is about that same size, which is off the cafeteria to the
Right,
side.
small.
How many square feet per?
The one difference is,
But it-
I think it's bigger than this should be.
the one difference is this is surrounded by a one-story building. In
Well,
the proposed, it will be surrounded by two-story, yeah. It's a little
About
different,
25.
section like we
Square
said.
feet per person?
But that's a good frame of reference
Really?
to
So
understand.
if you wanted to add
how large it
another
would be.
50 people,
So-
times 25, 1,250.
Any other issues or criteria that we're missing that we should be considering and analyzing these
Okay,
options?
so $500,000 left. That's $500,000. So I mean, $500,000 is.
Over 20, 30 years.
When the fire.
Well, so $500,000 over 10 years is
For gaining access around the building.
$50,000 a year.
Yeah,
that
we-
we could be saying,
We'd
you
put
know what, our
a, we'd put a
employees
template
have
on
to
it, make
get
sure the
rid of
fire
someone
can,
in this field
the
and
vehicle
have
can make
to
those
find a
radius
graduation.
turns, yeah.
You can get by.
And that's what
I
I'm
don't know
kind of
what
like
the
working through, is I'm thinking,
fire
so
codes
what's
right
the
now,
expense
fire
and what's the, that's a lot of money to go rent
Around
something and
the,
we're talking about one big event.
Sugar Hill and
So we do have
big
graduation in
mansion,
the
it's,
gym, and the gym.
assisted living.
And
Yes.
That entire building, you look around it, you
You're
can't.
gonna get a bigger gym.
It's got three lanes.
Okay.
So
All around
potentially
it.
you
It's
could,
all, hard packed gravel with
for
just,
some of
rice
those-
over top.
or-
Sustain weight of the
There's some hydrants there.
That's often what we try to pursue, that's why it's shown dotted, hoping that it could be grassed and just compacted properly with the right subbase, that it supports vehicles.
And that's exactly when they remodeled that entire mansion.
so then you have to, you know.
From an environmental point of view, too, we want to try to minimize pavement. We don't want to put in more parking spaces than we really need, because from an environmental point of view, you have to deal with that runoff in a storm,
So,
It's
yeah,
good.
no,
Try to
56
keep as much
clearly is
grass
not
and
worth the
green as
cost.
we can.
I don't
We've
have
even
to-
done some
right, and I think what we're-
projects where the pavement is porous, the rain can go through it, is sort of,
Yeah.
they're not quite microscopic, but small pores, it's like a sponge, and water can go through, and there's a lot of stone underneath, crushed stone, that absorbs it all, and it's wonderful, it's a little expensive, but
I'm
it's great.
honest, no matter what.
Particularly in
I think
elementary
I'm
school,
gonna tell you
playgrounds
the
like where they
numbers
have
are
paved
high,
playground in the
they feel
winter.
high,
and
But I don't know how
the,
to translate that
or,
back to.
you know,
something
shoulder
that's
seasons, they
digestible,
can play out there, the
because I
snow
can
melts
see
right away
from
because it's
the
warm.
heat,
It's
and
nice.
I mean, this is for.
So we do try to minimize
roads, so
pavement
I
as much
can't
as
see
we
from the
can.
AV.
Are there any hydrants on the perimeter?
There will be, I'm sure we would work with the fire department to figure out how
But I
many
can't
are
figure out
needed
what
and
Beckett's
appropriate,
portion is
but
for the next 35 years.
there's always at
That's
least
what I
one by
gotta
the
do.
back loading dock.
Because if I can get what Beckett's
within
portion
the
is,
front,
then I
and
can start to
beyond
get
that, we work
to
with them
what
as
is
to how
that,
many
what does
they
that
think
yearly
are
payment
appropriate.
look like?
Lose a lot of
And
time
based on
laying
what that
holes.
yearly
Right,
payment looks
right,
like,
and there'd be a
how
loop of
outrageous does
probably
that
the
feel? 'Cause
water
I
would
mean, I
probably
know
loop
that
around the
the
building
yearly
too, just,
payment, just to continue
again,
paying off
for
my
flexibility,
Washington
so
still
that it's
feels
not just a
outrageous,
dead end
because we,
stub
you
in.
know, as
We
far
find,
as
it's
how I
good to come in
feel,
one side,
I
go
feel
out
like
the
we're
other
kind of
side,
like at the
make two
border of like,
connections to
I'm
the
saying
main
we don't want to
street.
fund the school anymore, and yet we still have 10 more years on the
Yeah,
loan
sure,
at
yeah, that's what we
$100,000 a
hear.
year.
Yeah, it is.
Fire
Now,
department.
$100,000 is not.
And there'd be a much nicer, much better addressable fire alarm
Small
system
towns,
too.
yeah, I need to budget
Um,
$6 million.
Addressable means it tells you exactly which smoke detector went off or sprinkler head went off in the building, so you know where the fire is before you even get there.
Our,
Yeah, it's just gonna be.
Ambulation, is that what you're saying?
No, no, no.
That's a requirement.
no,
for
not our
building
portion, like our
size.
entire town's budget.
As
Oh, I
well.
see.
You know, if we did a renovation, that's one
But
of the
yeah, same
challenges,
for
but we have to
Beckett,
put
right?
sprinklers in the whole building.
I was just
Ceilings would all come
asking
down,
if
lights
they
would all
have
come
those, 'cause
down.
that's what this will
That's
reflect,
why,
is the
essentially,
capital
it's,
budget.
who was that? I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah, I
Jason,
don't know the difference
Dehan,
between what
the
was
facilities
happening.
guy
I'm
said,
sorry.
essentially
No,
we'd
that's
be
okay.
left with
I'm
carport.
not quite
We'd have a
that
roof
involved.
and some
Because
columns,
you
and
do
everything
well,
else
you
would
ran
be
out of
new.
money with the
Beyond
paying
that,
for the
'cause-
renovation,
and
so
roof would mean just the metal,
you were-
the
it
sheet,
was
you know,
103
metal
instead
deck.
of hundreds.
Because we put all new
I'm not
insulation on the
proud of
membrane, new
But
windows.
your
You know,
percentage
there's
of
some brick
this
walls
year,
around
just to
these
give you an
elements, but
idea,
mostly the rest of the building is glass, curtain, that would all get replaced.
was
So it would look like a
just under
carport
7%,
at some point,
6.92%.
when it's getting renovated.
So,
That's
for
how
that.
much we
How
could
much
sell.
is the
it.
building
7%,
itself
so-
to be used as a classroom?
If it was
You know,
80 million.
just studying photovoltaics, that's.
So
I
Oh,
lost
yeah,
this
that's
whole study
sustainability.
years
That's
ago.
definitely
So
part of
we
it.
were up
say it's.
We
it's
spend so much money putting this, you
Yep,
know,
so
this,
80
the technology
so yeah,
or
what I'm
strategies
thinking
into
is
buildings.
80 million.
We want to get some value out of it educationally too.
35%.
We don't want
So-
to hire
Right.
everything.
Right, right, so solar panels, you can't really see them, they're up on the
Right.
roof, but
So that means
typically,
the
we'll
district as a
have
whole would be responsible
a
for
way,
52
either a permanent
Yep.
monitor
And
set
without
up
interest,
or
the
a
interest will be
website
applied to this
that you
one,
can
which
go
is
to
like,
and get
say
live
we did
feedback
divide
as to how
over
much
30 years.
electricity is being generated by those panels right now.
Like 30 years.
Or you can look back last 5 days or a week and see on a cloudy day what'd you get, on a sunny day what'd you get, that sort of thing. sometimes we even try to put some panels where they're visible, just to let people know there are panels on the building. You know, they, especially on, say, the south side, they work well as sunshades, you know, and so, yeah. But more than that, other aspects of the building can be integrated into the curriculum. We just met with, I forget her name, that teaches environmental science at the school, April, about that, doing it right now, even before the new school's built. Come and talk with them about some of the environmental and energy, you know, strategies that might be used.
That's one of the cool things about this.
So those were tiny. Yeah, the bulk to Beckett, because
Want their
most of the
classes
kids
to,
in the
as
school
long as this project is
is
moving
Beckett,
forward in
Washington.
any way, shape, or form,
Yeah.
to literally learn from it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So it's becoming an educational
that goes
process
back to the
for
brass tacks.
a nice little chunk of our
So
students.
$171,000 a year.
If we go full-
Piece of equipment to keep the roads out.
If the vote happens,
They approve, they approve stuff in that range every year. They approve.
One of the things we do too is,
education.
There's stuff that we
are you familiar
approve
with
in that
LEED,
range
you know,
every
the
year. So I think
environmental and
back
energy
in Israel's
efficiency
really
standard? It's kind of like a scorecard with a bunch of categories, almost like a Chinese menu, that you need to score a certain number of points in order to be certified. If you score more than that, you get LEED silver, then LEED gold, LEED platinum.
But it's lower.
We
right?
anticipate
So-
this building will be LEED silver, which is higher than even just silver. And one of the categories that we try to pursue often is, they, in addition to the specified ones like energy and materials and water savings, they have one that's kind of open-ended called innovation. And typically, we work with the school administration to integrate the project into the curriculum. And that can count for 1 point on that scorecard too, in innovation. And oftentimes it's signs you see around the building so that, you know, when you're in the bathroom, there's a sign telling you these are water-saving toilets, they only use this much versus, you know, there's signage. That's one way to at least make it inherently part of the building, whether it's part of the curriculum or not. Have recycling programs that the kids are involved in, collecting the stuff, bringing it to the local lab, things like that, that can be made a part of the school.
You get back down to
You know,
$171,000 a year.
it's double benefit, like I say, it being part of the curriculum, you get learned, but also helps you achieve that LEED rating, which if we achieve LEED silver, which most of our projects do, the district gets 2 additional reimbursement points. That 54% goes to 56%. That's a lot of money when you multiply it by whatever these numbers, 2 times 80 million, that's 1.6 million.
And that's really what you have to look at, because 30 is a long
16,
time.
right?
So 25 would increase that.
1.6 million. So we can spend a lot in, you know, putting PV panels and making sure we get that 2%. Because you're gonna get that additional
But aside
reimbursement.
from looking at it very clearly, I think it's overlap, I know.
And you get the future savings
And
forever,
for cost.
forever. You know, it's not just a one-time cost to build it. You achieve the savings
And
from
if you have
PV or
more
water
kids,
savings
the
or.
percentage goes up.
Somebody mentioned about that.
Yeah.
We're gonna investigate it. It's tough to envision that's, one, it's not necessarily, I mean, it's renewable, I guess, because it's wood, but it's not necessarily carbon neutral. Building, you know, burning wood is not exactly carbon neutral. And the hopper size should be, yeah.
And back in the
Our fire
it averages out over 5
And
years.
he's in the talk.
Yeah, somebody asked us to look at it, so we are gonna look at it. But also from just a, you know, sustainability point of view, it's gonna be,
For the first year.
what do you call
So our property
it?
won't
Source
be
of
sure
sure,
nobody-
you know, like natural gas, we know it's gonna be there for the most part. Sometimes it slows down. Or, you know, oil. You know, there are multiple people that can deliver oil. You have to have multiple people that can deliver wood chips. Your heating system is dependent on this one private guy staying in operation. That's a lot of
Turn it on any time of the day, it keeps your rate up, and your bill,
Yes.
kilowatt hours is based on the rate. So
So
if my wife's running her dryer, and I'm running my welder,
State estimate in Beckett is
30 amps and 50 amps,
They promised
the
us.
demand meter goes up, and that's the factor they multiply with your kilowatts per
Kitchen needs it on demand.
We know I.
Yeah, chimneys are
I
efficient.
work on it, I was.
It's on demand, right?
So the demand meter
Yeah,
works.
for heating the building,
be hard.
That's
Well,
why.
both, I mean, we certainly need ventilation, so we have to temporize. Generally, we see hydronics.
Every time you take
Sidewalks are piping, all that, high efficiency. For
I wouldn't.
Or even we're a little more problematic up there with the wires kind of rot and rust. Yeah, well, I mean, you can't do that, I guess, that's another thing. Generally, there's a school outside, which is another thing, so you don't want to use electric heat. Unless you're passive house, standard. Passive houses where you build is super insulated, so tight that they have such a minimal heat load, you can go to a because something right, people in the lights.
Air in the lane.
Look, I'm not
more easily.
into amount of carbon myself. I'm not into this.
I don't want to oil pressure go way up.
Yeah, close out.
But there's
So there's a toxicity issue.
We're getting away from using foam insulation, not just spray foam, but even brick foam.
Right.
We tend to use it on the roof, but still,
Hanging in there?
yeah.
68
But more and more people want us to go to rock
oil, gas.
Thank you for,
we try to stay away from I guess that's what some people say. And it's gone through that over, and its lifespan over time, it also loses.
They all label them.
That was affected.
We'll find this one. Maybe
When you get to the story,
Unfortunately, we've got some scientists on our team that do energy modeling and help advise us on what the effect is. Because there is kind of 20% help to start putting, 6 inches up there. That might be the most effective, but, 12 inches. And it doubles the cost. It doesn't double the shape.
1 year.
Yeah, 9 days, 116.
And I do 116 down.
Yeah.
All 160 down in the chest.
You gonna wrap it up for us, John?
You like it up there? All right, okay.
And it'll send me a text.
Have a wrench. It's behind the house. So bottom right, north of the backyard.
I never know, I mean,
you are so efficient, Bob, one person.
State standard.
Even to outside, turn the lights on.
right. No, mine goes for the attic fan.
It's plumbing's good.
There you go.
For those stalwarts that are still here, we want to wrap up and kind of share what's going on in each group. John, you want to start for our group over here? John took notes.
Sure. Of interest to this group here was LEAD designation, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental
Design.
Yeah. And we anticipate achieving a LEED silver, and we figured out that's right. How much money to the town?
Well, potentially it's 2 points 2 additional reimbursement points. So the 54% would go to 56%. So depending on what the project cost is, the eligible, you know, if it were 70 million, let's say 2% of 70 million is 1.4 million.
Oh, another thing I mentioned at the last meeting, when you do the lead, you also, you get a lot of utility company rebates. We're getting, I'm thinking it's gonna be close to 600 grand out of utility company rebates. Probably be somewhat less here, but they pay you for, you know, using the LED lighting, they pay you for using high efficiency boilers, et cetera, et cetera.
Those are one time.
Yeah, one time, yes, one time.
So that's being incorporated in the planning for the building. We talked about the considerations related to moving students around during a renovation, which might be an argument for a completely new building where you don't have to do that. Talked about relocation of fields and temporary parking during construction, how that needs to be phased, some related costs to that. Talked about solar orientation of both the building and the athletic fields. Lengths of hallways, both in terms of students shuttling around from class to class during passing periods, but also from a strategic ballistic safety concern in the event of intruders in the building, that sort of thing. Talked about building security, controlling that through a central entryway with a vestibule. Ballistic glass, which is made in Pittsfield, it's called what?
School guard.
School guard. Talked about tech ed and how that's a little bit different than it used to be. Robotics classes, design labs, and those kinds of things. The importance of social emotional learning, having gathering spaces for schools, which is what a school is. Willard Waller was a sociologist, and he wrote a book, The Sociology of Schools in the 1920s, and he said, above all else, this is the 1920s, above all else, the high school campus is a meeting ground of the adolescent culture. So consider that. 2-story building efficiencies, larger auditorium, which will be some additional cost to the town if we go that route, but there may be some generating revenue options there in terms of renting out the auditorium for a large space for performances or whatnot. We talked about there'll be an emergency generator in the building, and it'll power up some larger spaces, which could then make the school useful as a refuge in the case of some kind of emergency in town. There was some mention of a reservoir nearby, which could be investigated further. And we talked about courtyards and all the different things related to that, including the difference of having a courtyard in a 2-story building as opposed to just a 1-story building. So those were some considerations we had.
Okay, thanks, sir. Vladimir?
Sure. Well, we started first in looking into this issue that was brought up here, the dam at the river and its proximity to the project site, and we determined that we'll look further into this and assess the situation. And then we actually went through every single option that were presented earlier, trying to understand pros and cons for each option, advantages and disadvantages, and trying to analyze what would be the best option for
the work done. Came to a conclusion?
Yes.
We came to conclusion,
It's over.
and interesting observation that in all recent meetings, the conclusion is always the same option. So option 2A1, which in short is this option with south-facing classrooms and the courtyard configuration built over the parking lot, is option that attracts everyone's attention and the preference. And we also spent some time looking at the size of the auditorium, right sizing of the auditorium. What's the right size of the auditorium for this community? And we also went back to the issue of school choice and school enrollment, trying to understand those concerns as well. And went into pretty detailed discussion of the tax impact of this project on the communities and obviously we'll provide more information on this down the line, but we're trying to understand what that meant.
Okay.
So that's where we are.
So your comments are important contributions to our process here, and we really appreciate that, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're not going to lose track of these, that's why we write them down. We're going to record them all and keep a record of all this. And there's obviously great resources too in the community, a lot of them online, that you can stay abreast of what's happening here with the building committee and the school district are very good at posting videos of these meetings as well as the materials that we have here, so you can follow along. And we'll be back here probably in September or October for another series of community meetings as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.